Did you know that one Australian car won Car of the Year in 1973, then became the final fatal blow that collapsed its company's operations within only 2 years? Another had an engine with such poor piston ring sealing that it consumed oil straight off the showroom floor, damaging Holden's reputation for a generation. And one car cost Ford a ridiculous $600 million to develop, only to become one of the most hated cars in Australian automotive history. From leaking roofs and rusting floors to exploding engines and gearboxes that jumped out of gear on the highway. These aren't just bad cars. These are automotive disasters that destroyed brands, ruined companies, and left thousands of owners stranded. Welcome to the 15 worst Australian cars ever made. The Holden Sunbird was Holden's attempt at an economy subcompact, and it was built purely to a price that showed in every single aspect of the car. The engine was harsh and buzzy, making highway road trips absolutely miserable. But the real crime was the interior. Trim quality was shockingly poor, with rattles and falling pieces becoming a standard feature almost immediately. What made it a true disaster was the timing. The Sunbird arrived just as Japanese imports were proving that cheap didn't have to mean garbage. Buyers quickly realized they'd rather spend a fraction more for a bulletproof Toyota than a Holden that felt cheap from day one. It was a cautionary tale in cutting corners. If you think building a car too cheaply is bad, imagine dropping nearly $90,000 on a performance car that's slower than its cheaper siblings. The HSV Coupe 4 was Australia's first all-wheel drive performance coupe. The problem? The all-wheel drive system added 190 kilos to the car, destroying its dynamics. It hit 100 kilometers per hour in 6.7 seconds, making it slower than less expensive rear-drive alternatives in HSV's own lineup. To make matters worse, you couldn't even get a manual. Imagine paying $90 grand for a driver-focused flagship and being forced into an automatic. Add in reports of leaking roofs, and it's no surprise only 132 of these were ever built. It was a massive engineering flex that absolutely nobody asked for. But at least HSV was trying to innovate. Coming up, we've got 2 cars that were literally just rebadged imports with new logos slapped on, and Australian buyers saw through the scam immediately. The Ford Corsair was nothing more than a rebadged Nissan Pintara wagon. Ford's grand contribution? They changed the badges and the trim. The Pintara was already a remarkably average car, so slapping a blue oval on it added zero performance or reliability. But the true absurdity was that Ford parked the Corsair on the showroom floor right next to the Falcon wagon. A genuinely Australian-engineered product, it created pointless internal competition. Buyers instantly recognized the Nissan interior, and it was dead within 3 years. But Ford wasn't the only one playing the rebadge game. There was the Holden Apollo, a rebadged Toyota Camry. Here's the embarrassing part. The pricing between the fake Holden and the real Toyota was often identical. Why on earth would anyone buy a fake Holden when they could get genuine Toyota reliability for the exact same money? The Apollo's existence was a white flag. It was an admission that Holden couldn't compete in the mid-size segment on their own. It completely undermined their Australian-made identity and left the Apollo rotting in a commercial no-man's land. A bad badge is one thing, but mechanical failure is another. Stick around, because one car on this list was shipped from America without testing, and its suspension literally tore itself apart on Australian roads. The Ford Falcon XK was ripped straight from the US market and dropped onto harsh Australian roads without proper testing. It haunted Ford almost immediately. The front suspension was the defining catastrophe. Corrugated rural roads and high-speed highways chewed up the American design, causing horrific noise, instability, and violently premature tire wear. But Ford's response was the real tragedy. When early buyers complained, Ford blamed the drivers, claiming they just didn't know how to drive the car. Imagine buying a brand new Ford, having the suspension fail, and the dealer telling you it's your fault. It was a masterclass in how to destroy brand trust. What I'm about to say is hard to believe. The 1972 Morris Marina used a rear suspension design dating back to the 1948 Morris Minor. British Leyland used obsolete 24-year-old technology just to save a few bucks. The result? Reviewers described the handling as wayward and unpredictable. Build quality was a joke. Mechanics loved it because it practically lived in their workshops. While local Holdens and Fords offered rugged durability and Japanese imports offered bulletproof one, the Marina offered nothing but headaches. It was outdated on arrival and consistently below average on every metric that mattered. We are about to enter the top 9. Every car from here on out is a genuine catastrophe, including an Australian-built convertible designed to take on the world that couldn't even keep the rain out on its very first test drive. Holden panicked during the 1979 oil shock. Anticipating skyrocketing fuel prices, they chopped 2 cylinders off their existing 6-cylinder engine to create the inline-4 Starfire. The engine was brutally harsh, completely unrefined, and desperately underpowered. Because it was so weak, drivers had to wring its neck just to keep up with traffic, which completely destroyed the fuel economy advantage it was supposed to have. When the massive fuel crisis never actually hit Australia, buyers abandoned the Starfire immediately. It was discontinued in just 2 years, the right answer to a problem that never happened. The Holden HD had massive shoes to fill, replacing the legendary E.H. Holden. Instead, it tripped and fell flat on its face. Quality control issues plagued the HD from day one. Inconsistent fit and finish, front suspension noise, and accelerated tire wear were constant headaches. This wasn't just a bad look. Tires were a massive expense in the 1960s. Ford was aggressively hunting Holden at the time, and the HD essentially handed Ford's sales team a loaded weapon. Holden panicked and replaced it with the HR after just 18 months. It remains one of Holden's most embarrassing blunders of the era. But wait until you see number 5. It was the absolute cheapest new car in Australia, but its safety rating was so catastrophic you'd be risking your life just getting on the highway. The tragic thing about the Mitsubishi 380 is that it was actually a good car. It was just born at the worst possible time. It launched exclusively with a thirsty 3.8-liter V6, right as fuel prices were spiking. At the exact same time, government fleets, historically Magna's biggest buyers, mandated a shift to 4-cylinder vehicles. Instantly, a massive chunk of their market vanished. There was no wagon variant for families. And with a bankrupt global parent company, Mitsubishi had zero marketing budget to fight the Commodore or the Falcon in a market that was already abandoning sedans for SUVs. It sold just 20,000 units and ultimately killed Mitsubishi's 30-year manufacturing history in Australia. Built in Adelaide to conquer the US market, the Ford Capri had one unforgettable flaw: the roof leaked. Guess where? In Adelaide. The soft-top design was an absolute disaster. The Australian-sourced fabric actually split in service, forcing a recall to replace it with European material. Water pooled in the floor pans, meaning brand-new cars were rusting from the inside out simply because it rained. Now try adding in scuttle shake, endless squeaks, heavy torque steer on the turbo models, and a base engine pushing a miserable 61 kilowatts. Compared to the Mazda MX-5 of the same era, the Capri was a joke. It was supposed to put Aussie manufacturing on the world stage. Instead, it became a punchline. We've reached the top 5. Things are about to get expensive. Coming up, a $600 million mistake from Ford and a Holden that literally drank oil from the factory. The Geely MK had one selling point. It was the cheapest new car in Australia, and you paid for it in every other way imaginable. As the first Chinese car sold in Australia, it was defined by brittle plastics, shocking panel gaps, and non-existent noise insulation. The 1.5-litre engine was dangerously underpowered. Merging onto a highway was a genuinely anxiety-inducing experience. But the real terror was the safety. While the MK wasn't tested locally, closely related Geely models scored a catastrophic 1-star ANCAP rating. Add in premature rust and zero resale value, and the cheapest car in Australia ended up costing owners dearly. The Holden Cruze was assembled in Adelaide but built on GM Daewoo engineering. That combination proved lethal to Holden's reputation. The 1.8-litre engine was plagued by oil leaks and phantom electrical faults that were impossible to diagnose. Early models had transmission issues that made the car flat-out dangerous to drive. The 1.4-litre turbo, famous for water pump failures and catastrophic overheating, it got so bad that the RAC actively warned consumers not to buy a locally built Holden. The Cruze, along with some other models, decimated the brand's remaining credibility. It didn't just break down, it helped kill Holden entirely. We got to the final three. Absolute legends of failure. A $600 million disaster. A car that destroyed a generation of trust. And a car of the year that killed its creator. Ford dropped an earth-shattering $600 million developing the AU Falcon. The result? The single most expensive aesthetic miscalculation in Australian history. The polarizing new edge styling was universally hated the second it dropped, but it was ugly under the hood too. Resin header tanks on the radiators cracked, water pumps leaked, power steering clunked, and even shift solenoids threw the car into limp mode. Even the door lock actuators failed, locking owners out of their own cars. While the mechanicals were eventually sorted, the styling damage was permanent. That $600 million investment pushed a record number of buyers straight into the arms of the rival VT Commodore. If the AU Falcon was ugly, the Holden Camira was fundamentally broken. The 1.6-litre engine suffered from poor overall design and catastrophic piston ring sealing, meaning brand new cars were guzzling oil straight out of the showroom. But that was just the start. The body sealant actually shrank around the firewall over time, letting water soak the carpets and rot the floors. Brand new cars were literally rusting from the inside out before they even left the lot. But the nightmare didn't stop at the engine and the rust. Holden's workforce had very limited experience assembling the large plastic body panels used on the Camira. The result? Hilariously inconsistent panel gaps and a cabin that rattled and squeaked non-stop. The original engine was dangerously underpowered, and when Holden tried to fix it with a 1.8-litre replacement in 1984, that engine just overheated and leaked oil everywhere. Add in CV joints that wore out at an alarming rate, and ownership costs skyrocketed. To top it all off, the manual gearboxes violently jumped out of second and third gear while driving, a drivability flaw that was genuinely dangerous. Crash safety was rated significantly worse than average. It was so universally hated that multiple publications named it one of the absolute worst Australian cars of all time. The Camira didn't just fail, it destroyed the trust of an entire generation of Holden buyers. And here we are, Australia's greatest automotive disaster. The Leyland P76 won Wheels Car of the Year in 1973. 2 years later, it became the final nail in the coffin for Leyland Australia. The root of the disaster was the timeline. The P76 was developed in a panicked 16 months on a microscopic $20 million budget, which is far, far too little for a major new car program. Because development was rushed, catastrophic quality issues completely escaped pre-launch testing. Leyland's weak financial position meant the supply chain was incredibly fragile, so component shortages compounded the misery on the assembly line. The mechanicals were an absolute joke. The 2.6-liter six-cylinder engines were notoriously prone to blown head gaskets, coolant leaks, and oil leaks. If you upgraded to the V8, the spark plugs had a heat range mismatch that caused severe fouling, and the engine famously overheated under sustained Australian driving conditions. Even the wiper motors weren't rated for heavy rain. Imagine driving in a storm and your wipers just give up because Leyland couldn't afford the right motor. Window seals leaked, and carpets literally came loose near the exhaust tunnel. British Leyland was already bleeding money globally, and their Australian division was incredibly weak. The P76 was supposed to be their savior. Instead, despite winning Car of the Year honors, they only managed to build about 18,000 units. Its massive commercial failure blew a $50 million hole in the budget, delivering the final fatal blow that forced the closure of their Zetland plant in 1974. It won Car of the Year, and then it helped bring down the entire operation. These cars didn't just fail. They brought down entire manufacturing plants, ruined legendary brands, and left thousands of Aussies stranded on the side of the road with cars that rusted, leaked, and depreciated into absolute worthlessness. Australian automotive manufacturing is officially over. The massive factories are closed and the assembly lines are silent. While we often look back on the Aussie car industry with a lot of pride and nostalgia, these 15 disasters remain as the ultimate harsh warnings of what happens when corners are cut, development is rushed, and local markets are completely misjudged. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with a mate. And look, if you were unlucky enough to actually own one of these catastrophes, I want to hear about it. Drop your Camira oil consumption horror stories, your AU radiator failures, or your P76 absolute nightmares in the comments below. Thank you for watching and goodbye.